Story is an often misunderstood aspect of fighting games, treated poorly by the community who play it and an afterthought to the people who make it. While most fighting game stories are globe-trotting anime adventures or poorly thought out attractions for casuals, fighting game lore is a fascinating thing to some and an embarrassment to others. I happen to fall into both categories, so join me as I regale you with some of the many stories told to us from fighting games. The King of Fighters is an interesting series, collecting some of SNK's best and most popular franchises and putting them all together into a 3-on-3 team-based fighter. While it never reached the popularity of its rival Street Fighter, The King of Fighters is still a celebrated piece of fighting game history, being especially popular in Japan and numerous South American countries like Brazil. One thing people have always praised The King of Fighters for is its stories. Infamous sagas spreading across multiple years and games, some of the best narratives in the entire fighting game genre belong to SNK. With the Orochi Saga and Nessus Chronicles arcs behind us, it's time to move on to the third arc of the KOF series, titled Tales of Ash, and starring the mysterious anti-hero Ash Crimson. If you haven't watched my previous videos on the King of Fighters series, I highly recommend doing so by clicking on the link above. It's worth noting that some games in the King of Fighters series are labelled as Dream Match games, and thus do not have a canon story or a prominent part of the series narrative. These games are KOF 98, 2002 and 12, so I won't be talking about these games in these videos unless I have to. With the King of Fighters 15 finally revealed, I think it's as good a time as any to go through the entire King of Fighters series saga by saga as a means of refreshing old players and informing new ones on the crazy world of KOF. It's been some time since the events of the King of Fighters XII tournament that saw the mysterious faction known as Those from the Past hijack the competition in the hopes of freeing the powerful being known as Orochi to fuel their own nefarious goals. Following the defeat of Those from the Past's Megaki and Shion, a rabid Iori Yagami under the effects of the Riot of the Blood was stopped by the enigmatic Ash Crimson, who used the opportunity to steal Iori's sacred treasure, the Yasakani Jewel. Now holding two of the sacred treasures used to seal Orochi, Iori's Yasakani Jewel and Chizuru Kagura's Yatamira, Ash vanished from the tournament after making the threatening promise to take Kyo Kusanagi's family sword next. Now without his family's sacred treasure, Iori finds himself unable to use his usual purple flames that were a side effect of a curse placed on his family due to a deal his ancestors made with Orochi centuries ago. Seeking answers, Iori asks Chizuru if she is still able to use her powers without possessing the Yatamira. Given that she is indeed unable to use her powers, Iori realizes that he must retrieve his family's treasure from Ash in order to regain his purple flames. Chizuru, however, offers Iori the prospect of ridding himself and his family bloodline of the Orochi curse, but Iori shows no interest in saving himself from his doomed fate as the heir to the Yagami clan. As he ends their conversation, Iori promises Chizuru that her treasure will return to her in due time. After being attacked by Iori at the end of the KOF 11 tournament, Kyo Kusanagi finds himself hospitalized in order to heal from his injuries, but he manages to escape in order to track down Ash and stop whatever he has planned. While roaming the streets searching for Ash, Kyo is ambushed by Shroom and Romello, the two members of Those from the Past that attacked the Akari Warriors at the end of the 11 tournament. Kyo defends himself from their attacks, but the two instead give him a sealed envelope before leaving. Kyo takes a look at the envelope and realizes that it's none other than an invitation to a new King of Fighters tournament. Knowing that Ash's as well as Those from the Past's plans are now in effect, he leaves to assemble a team for the competition. Once again hosted by Rose Bernstein under the control of Those from the Past's Botan, fighters across the world receive their invitations to the King of Fighters 13 tournament. As opposed to the dramatic shake-ups of the previous tournament, most competitors return to team formations used in the original tournaments, and the rules return to their state from the 94 to 97 tournaments. After receiving his invitation, Kyo decides to neglect visiting Chizuru and the injured Shingo Ibuki and instead meets up with his old friends Benimaru Nikaido and Goro Daimon. Relying on their previous dominance in the tournament, the three reform the Japan team. After relying on old acquaintances for the last two tournaments, Terry Bogard is happy when his brother Andy Bogard and friend Joe Agashi return to Southtown to catch up and reform the legendary Fatal Fury team. After their failed escapades in getting their son and friend together with King in the previous tournament, Takuma Sakazaki and Robert Garcia return to the tournament with Kyokugen Ryu legend Ryo Sakazaki to reform the original Art of Fighting team. Meanwhile, King, Mai Shiranui and Yuri Sakazaki return to their original formation from the 94 and 95 tournaments to make up the Women Fighters team, as do the Psycho Soldier team, once again consisting of Athena Asamiya, C. Kensu, and Shin Gensai. After his brief time spent with Terry on the Fatal Fury team, Kim Kap-won returns to his criminal rehabilitation subjects Chan Ko-han and Choi Boonj and deems them to have mended their ways. Thrilled at the idea of getting away from Kim's intense personality, Chang and Choi quickly flee from Kim, who decides to move on to two new subjects. Remembering them from his past, Kim confronts wrestler Raiden and kickboxer YJ and, mistakenly, accuses them of still working for crime lord Geese Howard. Ignoring their attempts to prove otherwise, Kim forces the two to join his rehabilitation program and uses the new tournament as a way to reform them. After taking time off during the 11th tournament due to her being unable to control the Orochi blood within her, Leona Haiden returns to active duty and reunites with her comrades Ralph Jones and Clark Still, who enter the tournament on the orders of the commanding officer Haiden, who has assembled a task force to combat Ash Crimson and those from the past. Former Nest agent K-Dash shows no interest in participating in this year's tournament and decides to remain home with his friends and fellow Nest outcasts Maxima and Cooler Diamond. However, K-Dash becomes upset when he discovers that Cooler has entered all three into the tournament after being talked into it by Shin Gensai, who had wanted to see K-Dash's reaction out of curiosity. Having been entered as the K-Dash team, K-Dash, Maxima and Cooler once again team up to enter the competition. While searching for Ash and his sacred treasure, Iori suddenly finds himself visited by two apparitions resembling Mature and Vice, his former teammates and members of the Hakushu that Iori killed at the end of the '96 tournament while in the fevered Orochi blood rage. To Iori's shock, however, Mature and Vice reveal themselves to be the real deal and that, despite their death, they still exist in the mortal realm as servants of Orochi. Orochi, being aware that those from the past are attempting to use its power, has returned Mature and Vice to corporeal forms in order to prevent Ash and those from the past from abusing its power. Despite being the one to end their lives, Mature and Vice claim to hold no ill will towards Iori and offer to be his teammates in the upcoming tournament. Iori is at first reluctant to once again accept the help of Orochi's servants, but his desire to regain his sacred treasure proves stronger and he accepts. Together, Iori, Mature and Vice team up to reform the Yagami team. Having received her own invitation to the tournament, Elizabeth Blanctorche, the last remaining member of her noble family and Nash's childhood friend, visits the remains of her childhood home. As she reminisces about her time growing up with Ash, she begins to wonder what has made Ash change from the person she knew into the man he is today. Remembering their mission to restore the Blanctorche estate, Elizabeth prepares herself for the outcome of Ash forsaking their goal and leaves the estate. Meanwhile, Ash's old companions Duolon and Shenwu journey to Paris in order to meet with Elizabeth. Having joined together with the goal of finding and confronting Ash for his actions in the previous tournament as well as his betrayal of pitting Shenwu and Oswald against each other, Duolon and Shenwu are met by Elizabeth, who offers to join up with them for the KOF 13 tournament as a means for all three to fulfill their goal of finding Ash together. Duolon and Shenwu agree to join up with Elizabeth and together form the new Elizabeth team. Somewhere in southern Saudi Arabia, Maxima, Cooler and the bored K-Dash investigate a set of ancient ruins that only recently appeared as part of her mercenary job. As Cooler complains about the heat, Maxima scans the ruins to discover that they are at least 1,000 years old. As the three continue to investigate the ruins, they discover bizarre reliefs painted on the walls depicting inhuman shapes with tremendous powers surrounded by people in various places. Moving deeper into the ruins, the three knock down a wall and find a statue depicting a gate-like door and more reliefs on the walls. Creeped out by the nature of the room, Maxima finishes compiling his data before the three leave. In an unknown location, Ash Crimson is visited by Botan of those from the past, who gives him an invitation to the tournament. Ash makes a snide remark while accepting the invitation, but is quickly reprimanded by Botan, who reminds him that if it wasn't for him, he wouldn't be alive today. Ash blows off Botan's warnings but is informed of Elizabeth's arrival in Paris and goal of finding Ash. Botan orders Ash to dispose of Elizabeth should she get in their way, revealing that Ash is now working alongside those from the past. As Ash tries to leave, Botan admonishes Ash for entering that room, despite knowing that he's strictly forbidden from accessing it. Ash playfully ignores Botan's warnings before using the Yatta mirror to vanish. In a large empty void, Ash meets with Shroom and Romello and comments on Shroom's singed clothing after his clash with Kyo. Ash then tells Shroom that the path he currently walks on with him has no happy ending. Shroom shrugs off Ash's words, but Ash tries to goad him into entering the forbidden room, to which Shroom ignores. At the newly built Bernstein Stadium, Adelheid Bernstein meets with his sister Rose, who prepares herself for the tournament. Adelheid tries to question Rose as to what her intent is, but Rose ignores his questioning and assumes that he wishes to enter the tournament himself. Adelheid grabs Rose and asks her why he was not made aware of the tournament and the construction of the stadium until recently, but Rose, in a trance-like state, completely ignores her brother's questions and instead continues to act as if Adelheid wishes to enter the tournament. As Rose leaves to begin the opening ceremony, a shocked and disturbed Adelheid worries for his sister and what his next move should be. At the Ikari's command base, Haiden fills in his operatives on the current state of affairs, commenting on them losing track of Ash's whereabouts and their intel on the nature of those from the past. Haiden, having used their intel to analyse Megaki's abilities, discovered that due to Megaki leaving behind a small distortion of space every time he used his portals, they could track the other members of those from the past, but due to Shroom and Romello's act of stealing Megaki's body after the previous tournament, they have lost the tracking signal needed to follow the cult's movements. Haiden informs his team, consisting of agents Seth, Blue Mary, Ramon and Vanessa, that Ash Crimson, along with the rest of those from the past, are major threats, with Ash in particular being the knot that ties these string of events together, being the one that links those from the past and the sacred treasures together through his actions. Haiden tasks the agents with investigating their subjects and to prevent any damage those from the past and Ash are planning to cause before dismissing them. At the Bernstein Stadium, Rose opens the King of Fire's 13 tournament with a lavish ceremony. As the opening ceremony goes on, Ash sits atop the stadium and observes the ongoing festivities, remarking on how things have finally begun. With the tournament finally underway, things appear to go smoothly for the competitors, but behind the scenes things begin to stir as the major players make their moves. In the Ikari command base, Seth oversees the other agents as they infiltrate the stadium. Meanwhile, Chizuru and Shingo watch the fights together, but Chizuru worries about Orochi breaking free of the seal before Iori and Kyo can stop Ash and those from the past. Ash scans the stadium for anything of note as he sees Chizuru and wonders if the major players are present. As lots of familiar faces from previous tournaments gather in the crowd to watch the fights, Ash comments on how carefree they are and how he's going to love seeing the looks on their faces once it happens. Ash thinks about how each person has their own plan, but claims that the only one who knows everything is him, and that every single one of them is his pawn. Suddenly the stadium is enveloped in a thick red fog as Ash notes that it is almost ready. Meanwhile on Sky Noah, Adelheid continues to worry about how he can help his sister Rose. Ash then suddenly appears behind Adelheid and informs him of Botan's role in manipulating Rose. Adelheid berates Ash and those from the past for exploiting Rose to host the tournament, but Ash coyly teases Adelheid to contact his friend if he wants more answers before leaving. Frustrated at Ash's teasing and lack of clarity, Adelheid immediately contacts Haiden, with the two having secretly been communicating since the events of the 2003 tournament. Haiden is surprised to hear from Adelheid, who begins relaying the information he has gleaned from Ash about the true intent of this year's tournament. Vanessa, Ramon and Blue Mary continue to scout the Bernstein Stadium and the multiple fight venues but are unable to find anything of note. As they keep searching, those from the past watch live feeds of the tournament where Rose talks to the press about the construction of the stadium. Botan reveals that after Mukai broke the seal of Orochi in the 2003 tournament and Megaki located the energy of Orochi in the 11 tournament, she used her manipulation of Rose to order the construction of the Bernstein Stadium over it, with it being described as a gate that will soon be complete. At the same time, Mukai reports to his master, the leader of those from the past and the one that the cult strive to give Orochi's power to, Psyche. Mukai informs Psyche that they only need to gather the 3 sacred treasures and let the events of the tournament unfold before their goal can be reached. Psyche insults Mukai and the rest of his followers for being incompetent, but Mukai instead takes all the blame for the cult's failures. A frustrated Psyche points out that with Megaki dead and Shion missing, their window for pulling off their plan grows even smaller. Later, Ash meets with Psyche, who gives a brief report on the status of their plans, but Psyche admonishes Ash for not doing his job, as the holder of the sacred treasures and the Ikari warriors are both interfering in the tournament while Orochi remains asleep. Ash tries to snarkily play coy with Psyche, but is instead threatened by the powerful being should the Kusanagi sword fail to work as intended. Despite Ash's attempts to assure him that he'll get the job done, Psyche points out that despite being given an invitation, Ash isn't competing in the tournament. Questioning if Ash even has a plan, Psyche is reassured by Ash that he indeed has a plan and not to worry, but Psyche remains unconvinced as Ash vanishes, calling the enigmatic young man a conceited worm. In a library inside those from the past's headquarters, Shroom and Romello study a book that shows a diagram of an elaborate gate that greatly resembles the statue the Kadash team found in Saudi Arabia in a sphere balanced on a stand. Shroom reflects on Ash's words about being pawns and leaves the library with Romello, promising that the two will talk about their future. Back in Sky Noah, Adelheid scours the records on board the ship's computer servers where he finds blueprints of the Bernstein Stadium. These blueprints are different to the ones Adelheid already possessed, and show spheres similar to the one in Shroom's book hidden in a large underground facility underneath the stadium. Adelheid immediately contacts Haiden and informs him of this troubling update. The The two deduce that given the patterns and layout of the facility, the area underneath the stadium is more than likely intended to use the fighters and crowd's energies to rouse Orochi. Adelheid forwards the data onto Haiden, who immediately sends his agents to investigate. At the same time, Ash stands atop the stadium once again as he talks to himself about how history will be changed and how the stadium will use the energy from the fights to awaken Orochi, who will become immediately trapped and consumed by Psyche before it can even fight back, ultimately serving as the key needed to return to the past, which appears to be Psyche's ultimate goal. Underneath the stadium, Seth, Ramon, Vanessa and Blue Mary enter the underground facility and discover a type of energy gathering equipment at the center. The agents report into Haiden about the discoveries, but are suddenly interrupted by major space-time fluctuations which are detected on the surface, causing the entire underground facility to shake and crumble. Meanwhile, Psyche berates his followers once again for their failure to correctly complete their jobs, with the current amount of energy gathered not being enough to awaken Orochi, the agents being able to access the hidden underground facility, Botan's manipulation of Rose being unstable, and the defective Ash not knowing his place. As the tournament nears its climax, only a small handful of teams reach the Bernstein Stadium for the finals, including the Japan team, the Yagami team, and the Elizabeth team. Now, I have to pause here for a second because unfortunately, KOF 13 is one of the few games in the series where a canon winner of the tournament has never been revealed, and I need to clarify some things before I continue. Given the nature of how the rest of the game's story plays out, there are two possible teams that can win the tournament. These are the Elizabeth team and the Japan team. While the Elizabeth team are canonically the ones that go on to face those from the past, the Japan team are also the only team with a canonical ending that directly mentions their victory in the competition. So, to make things simple, I'm going to continue the rest of this video with the idea that the Japan team win the tournament while the Elizabeth team face Psyche. Just bear in mind that this outcome is not the established canon, just the one that makes the most sense to me. With that out of the way, let's get back to the final chapter of the Ash saga. After a climactic tournament final, the energy from the fighters and the crowd start to build up more and more, which changes the underground facility beneath the stadium into a hellish landscape of fire and brimstone. Ash teleports into the facility and looks around, as he wonders if Psyche, who is actually Ash's ancestor, is ready to open the gate to a new history. The nearby Ikari battleships observe the increasing amount of space-time fluctuations all over the stadium's surface, as well as a large heat source growing underneath the stadium. Upon comparing the heat source to others in the database, the Ikari warriors are horrified to learn that the heat source matches with Orochi's from the 97 tournament. Haiden immediately moves his unit into action as he realizes that Ash Crimson has finally gathered enough energy to awaken Orochi, placing him as the Ikari warriors' #1 target. As the Japan team celebrate their victory in another KOF tournament, Rose celebrates their success. However, the increase in space-time fluctuations has proven too much for the balance of space and time, as everyone in the arena bar the Elizabeth team are frozen in time. Those from the past suddenly make their arrival, teleporting into the arena. The Elizabeth team at first assume Mukai to be behind the ongoing events, but the others scatter to their positions when Psyche appears, who the Elizabeth team at first mistake to be Ash. When Psyche questions Mukai as to why he's the only one of his group who hasn't left, Mukai offers to kill the Elizabeth team for his master, but Psyche instead kills Mukai and absorbs his power as punishment for ignoring him. Psyche then turns his attention to the Elizabeth team and begins to transform into an enhanced state while promising to kill them, though he desires them to suffer for as long as possible in order to fuel Orochi even more. The visage of the arena begins to change into a blood-drenched wasteland as a large gate erupts from beneath the stadium. Psyche is pleased when the Elizabeth team vow to fight back, telling them that anger and hatred mixed with a strong fighting spirit make the best sacrifices to Orochi. Psyche then takes on the Elizabeth team in a fight in front of the gate as it slowly begins to open. Despite Psyche's insane strength and power, the Elizabeth team are able to defeat him, though any damage to Psyche from the fight is almost non-existent as he demands they continue to fight in order to fuel Orochi more. Suddenly, Botan notices the doors of the gate are closing and alerts Psyche. Botan then realizes that someone has stolen the time spheres from the gate, which has sealed off its power and caused the doors to close. As Psyche admonishes his followers for their inability to prevent the time spheres from being stolen, he wonders who the culprit is as Ash Crimson suddenly impales Psyche from behind in order to steal his soul, having waited for Psyche to lower his guard to do so. Botan curses Ash for his betrayal, realizing that he never had any intention of gathering the sacred treasures for those from the past. Ash claims that Psyche and his followers will all slowly die off across 700 years of history, but he is suddenly overcome by an evil essence. With Ash unable to control Psyche's purely evil soul, Psyche instead uses his descendant's body as his new host and completely overwhelms him. The entire stadium is suddenly purged in a white light, as the Elizabeth team find themselves in the empty white void with the possessed Ash in the gate. With Ash's body lost to Psyche's control, Elizabeth and the others are forced to fight their friend and companion. Despite a tough fight, the possessed Ash is defeated by the Elizabeth team and put down for good. Ash's body stops moving as Elizabeth calls out to Ash in the hopes of saving him from Psyche's control. The two souls appear behind his comatose body as Psyche tries to convince Ash of the futility of continuing to challenge him, as he knows everything there is to know about him as his ancestor, master, and god. Psyche then commands Ash to enter the gate in order to return to their era, telling him that no matter how long it takes, they can keep restarting time until they control the gate that connects the eras and rewrite the future in Psyche's image, his true goal all along. Ash's body remains still in front of the gate as it begins to close. Elizabeth and Psyche both call out to Ash, with Psyche growing frustrated at Ash's refusal to obey him. Ash remains still for too long, however, as the gate closes before vanishing, to Psyche's horror. Psyche berates Ash for his inaction, leading them to a fate worse than death, as Ash admonishes Psyche for assuming he knew everything about him. As Psyche worries about what the time paradox that Ash has created will do to him, Ash tells Psyche that he actually likes this world, before Psyche and his evil essence vanish into the void and into a state of undeath. Elizabeth runs to confront Ash, but Ash can only apologise for messing up his plan, saying that he had intended to end things cleanly. Ash tells a confused Elizabeth that with him having erased his ancestors' existence from history, Ash would no longer have existed either. Elizabeth yells her protests towards Ash's selfish choices, stating that she wanted to bring him back home with her, but Ash can only apologise to Elizabeth before vanishing into nothingness, now having also never existed. With Psyche and Ash's erasure from history, the stadium resumes time with none in attendance any the wiser as to the events that had transpired. Rose concludes her closing speech as the festivities continue. On the Ikari battleship, Haydn has passed along a message sent on a timer from someone known as Flame of Nova, who is highly implied to be Ash Crimson himself. Haydn immediately plays the message on a secure line, but doesn't disclose the contents of it. Haydn's operator informs him of the space-time distortion suddenly growing more intense as it expands even faster than before, to which Haydn realises that Ash has managed to stop those from the past, and that everything that happened at the event and everything relating to it, even their memories, will have never existed. With the threat potentially quelled for now, Haydn and the Ikari forces are left with no choice but to withdraw and end their operations. Haydn notes that it's debatable if Ash saved them all, as he erased himself but saved his pride, though none will ever remember it. After making her closing address, Rose Bernstein suddenly collapses as Botan's strings are finally cut, freeing her from those from the past's control. Adelheid manages to catch Rose before she falls to the floor, which confuses him as it felt like he knew it was going to happen moments before it did. Adelheid struggles to remember what was going to happen as the events of Ash's time erasure begin to have an effect. No longer able to remember who was manipulating Rose, Adelheid begins to feel a looming dread over himself as he notices that he has multiple gaps in his memory. As he starts to lose consciousness himself, Adelheid forgets his worries and focuses on protecting Rose, leaving him feeling fulfilled at having completed his role as her older brother. Rose slowly comes to, but Adelheid calms her down by telling her it was all a bad dream. Rose has faint memories of being manipulated into killing Adelheid, but he tells her that she'll soon forget them as the two siblings' memories continue to fade. With Ash's erasure from history, Iori's Yasakani jewels return to him. Feeling Orochi's power within it, Iori stares at the cursed sacred treasure as Machiro and Vice offer him a way out of being bound by the Orochi blood. The two ask Iori if he and his family want to be free from the Yasakani curse, resetting his flames and erasing his blood feud with Kyo. Machiro and Vice decline to interfere with Iori's decision and ask him what he wants. Iori briefly pauses before clutching the jewel tight, accepting the Orochi blood and Yasakani curse within him once again, restoring his purple flames. Machiro and Vice show delight in Iori's choice, hinting that they'll meet again in their dreams before returning to their graves. Inside the arena, a large tornado of purple flame erupts as Iori crashes the Japan team's celebratory interview to challenge Kyo to one more fight. Bendamaru and Daimon watch as the two share some brief words, discussing their lack of interest in the fame KOF brings, before reigniting their rivalry once again. With what appears to have been a rather uneventful tournament having concluded for another year, the competitors say their goodbyes before going their separate ways. As they part ways at an airport, Raiden and Hua Jie exuberantly sing their praises of Kim's ability to rehabilitate them and promise to carry on his message in their own fields. Kim expresses his pride in how quickly they have reformed before bidding the two farewell. Upon Kim leaving, Raiden and Hua Jie drop their facade and mock Kim for being fooled into thinking they no longer needed him, as well as laughing at Chang and Choi's attempts to pin Kim on them. Upon arriving home, Kim, having realised that Raiden and Hua Jie tricked him, returns his attentions to Chang and Choi and puts them on an even intenser training regimen, remarking that he had been too soft on them as well as Raiden and Hua Jie. Leona wakes up in a hospital room to see Clark waiting by her bedside. Outside the room, Leona hears Ralph and Whip arguing with a doctor about her condition, but the two quickly run into the room and Clark alerts them to Leona's awakening. Having collapsed due to those from the past's attempts to free Orochi, Leona watches as her teammates begin bickering about the best way to help her recover, leading to Leona laughing for the first time in years. Their mercenary work completed, K-, Maxima and Cooler vacation on a luxury cruise ship. Aboard, K- remains adamant that he's done with K-Wear, but Maxima tells him to just enjoy his vacation as he orders an extremely large sundae. The two discuss who got them roped into the tournament this year, remembering that it was Cooler. The two look around for her and find her playing in the pool. Suddenly the two are attacked by gunmen disguised as waders. As they and Cooler are quickly surrounded, the three use their power of nests to fight back against their attackers. Sometime after the tournament, Shroom and Ramillo gather in the White Void where they see a familiar spear. They look up to find themselves encountering none other than Shion, who has survived Megaki's betrayal. After the conclusion of the tournament, Elizabeth, Duolon and Shenwu still remain at the stadium. Elizabeth's butler Jacques asks her if she's okay, but Elizabeth just says she feels queasy. She asks Jacques to tell Duolon and Shenwu that she's grateful for their help before leaving. Shenwu asks Duolon how Elizabeth is, as the two comment on how much she's been through and how her current attitude is not like her. The two briefly bicker about the other not leaving, with Duolon admitting that he's staying behind due to a promise he made, though he can't remember to who, to which Shenwu feels the same way. As she sits in the carriage on her way home, a solemn Elizabeth clutches Ash's headband, somehow being the only person to still remember him. As the effects of Ash's sacrifice take effect and his placement in history is erased, the competitors of the King of Fighters 13 tournament and those involved with those from the past return to their lives, oblivious to the heroic actions of Ash Crimson. The Years at the Springs and Days at the Morn. Mornings at 7. The hillsides dew-pearled. The larks on the wing. The snails on the thorn. God's in his heaven. All's right with the world.
We await your return, warrior.